In the bustling town of Mwanga, surrounded by lush green hills and the rhythmic sounds of drums echoing from afar, lived a brave firefighter named Brian. Brian was known for his courage and quick thinking, always ready to dash into the flames to save lives. His broad shoulders and steady gaze made him a comforting sight during emergencies. One sunny afternoon, as the townspeople were busy with their daily activities, a thick cloud of smoke started rising from one of the oldest buildings in town. The marketplace was buzzing, and soon, cries of alarm filled the air. "Fire! Fire at Mama Chiku's shop!" someone shouted. Without wasting a moment, Brian grabbed his helmet and rushed towards the source of the smoke. Mama Chiku's shop was a small, cozy store known for its sweet-smelling spices and hand-woven baskets. But now, it was engulfed in flames. Brian's heart raced as he saw the orange tongues of fire licking the wooden beams of the building. He could hear the faint cries for help coming from inside. Without hesitation, he charged through the front door, the heat pressing against him like a solid wall. Inside, the air was thick with smoke. Brian squinted through the haze, trying to locate the source of the cries. Finally, in a corner of the room, he spotted a young girl, her eyes wide with fear, clutching something close to her chest. "Hang on, I'm coming to get you," Brian shouted, his voice barely audible over the crackling flames. He moved swiftly, scooping the girl into his arms and covering her with his jacket. With a determined push, he made his way back through the burning shop, shielding the girl from the intense heat and falling debris. They emerged into the fresh air, Brian gasping as he placed the girl gently on the ground. The townspeople cheered and clapped, their relief palpable. Brian leaned back, taking deep breaths as the girl's mother ran over to hug her tightly. "Thank you, Brian. You saved my daughter," the mother cried, tears streaming down her face. Brian smiled weakly, nodding. "I'm just glad she's safe." As he stood up to check on the rest of the building, something caught his eye. The girl, still trembling, was clutching a pendant around her neck. It was a simple silver locket with delicate carvings on the front. Brian's breath caught in his throat as he recognized it. This pendant was special. He had given it to his wife, Laura, years ago as a symbol of their love. It was unique, with a small engraving of a baobab tree on the back, representing strength and endurance. Brian's mind raced. How did this young girl come to have it? He knelt down beside her, gently touching the locket. "Where did you get this?" he asked softly, trying not to alarm her. The girl, her eyes still wide, looked up at him. "It was a gift from my mother," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Brian's heart skipped a beat. "Who is your mother?" he asked, a sense of urgency creeping into his voice. She lives far away now," the girl replied, her voice shaking. "But she told me to wear this always, to remember her." Brian's mind was spinning. Could it be possible that this girl's mother was connected to his wife? He had to know more. But as he tried to gather his thoughts, the girl's mother approached again, thanking him repeatedly. Brian stood up, still dazed. He watched as the girl and her mother walked away, his eyes fixed on the locket around her neck. Questions swirled in his mind. What had happened to Laura? How had this pendant found its way to this young girl? Determined to uncover the truth, Brian knew he had to find answers. He couldn't shake the feeling that his past and the present were intertwined in ways he couldn't yet understand. As the smoke began to clear from the now smoldering building, Brian resolved to follow this new trail. The pendant was a clue, a link to something he needed to discover. Brian stood there, deep in thought, As the smoke cleared and the crowd began to disperse, his mind raced with memories of Laura and the life they had shared. They had met in a small village by the great river Nile, where the baobab trees stood tall against the endless sky. He had crafted the pendant himself, pouring his heart into every detail, never imagining it would end up around the neck of a stranger's child. Determined to uncover the mystery, Brian took a deep breath and walked over to the girl's mother, who was gently brushing soot off her daughter's dress. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "May I speak with you for a moment? It's about the pendant." The mother looked up, her eyes still glistening with tears of relief. "Of course," she replied, her voice tinged with gratitude. "Anything you need, Brian." Brian knelt down to be at eye level with the girl, offering her a reassuring smile. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated, glancing at her mother for approval before speaking. "My name is Zuri," she said softly, her voice carrying a hint of curiosity. Brian nodded, trying to ease the tension he could see in her young face. "That's a beautiful name, Zuri. I couldn't help but notice your pendant. It's very special to me because I made one just like it for my wife, Laura. Do you know how your mother got it?" Zuri's mother, who introduced herself as Nia, looked thoughtful. "My sister gave it to Zuri," she explained. "She said it was a precious family heirloom. I didn't think much of it, but I see it means a lot to you. Do you know my sister?" Brian's heart skipped a beat. "Your sister?" he repeated, trying to keep his voice calm. "What is her name?" Nia hesitated for a moment before answering. "Her name is Laura. She moved away some years ago. We lost touch, but she sends gifts for Zuri whenever she can." Brian's legs felt weak. Could it be the same Laura, his Laura? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but there were still so many questions. "Where did she go?" Brian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know where she is now?" Nia shook her head, her expression turning sad. "I don't know exactly. She moved to another town far away after some difficult times. She wanted to start fresh. The last we heard, she was living in Ujiji, near the shores of Lake Tanganyika." Brian's mind was racing. Ujiji was a long way from Mwanga, but it was a lead, a direction to follow. He had to find out if this Laura was the same woman he had lost so many years ago. "Thank you, Nia," Brian said, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and determination. "I need to go to Ujiji. I need to find her." Nia nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I hope you find the answers you're looking for, Brian. Laura is a good woman. She deserves to be found." With a renewed sense of purpose, Brian turned and made his way back to the fire station. He needed to prepare for the journey ahead. Ujiji was far, and the path was uncertain, but he knew he had to follow it. The pendant around Zuri's neck had ignited a spark within him, a desire to uncover the truth and find the woman he had loved for so long. As he packed his belongings, Brian couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and anxiety. The road to Ujiji was long, but with each step, he felt closer to finding Laura. The thought of seeing her again, of understanding why she had left, filled him with hope. The next morning, as the sun rose over the town of Mwanga, Brian set off on his journey. The path ahead was uncertain, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay in his way. He had a mission, and nothing would stop him from finding Laura and discovering the truth about the pendant and their past. The road to Ujiji stretched before Brian like a long ribbon of possibilities. He traveled through vibrant towns and serene villages, each with its own story, its own heartbeat. The journey was grueling, but the thought of finding Laura kept him moving forward. After several days of travel, Brian finally reached the shores of Lake Tanganyika. Ujiji was a bustling town, full of life and color, its markets vibrant with the sound of traders calling out their wares and children playing by the lakeside. The air was filled with the scent of fresh fish and spices, and the gentle lapping of the lake's waters provided a soothing background to the town's lively energy. Brian wandered through the town, asking about Laura. Most people shook their heads, unfamiliar with the name. But then, in a small cafe near the water's edge, he found a woman who knew something. "Laura?" the woman repeated, her eyes narrowing in thought. "Yes, I remember her. She used to work at the hospital nearby. She was very kind, always helping others. But she left a few months ago." Brian's heart sank. "Do you know where she went?" The woman nodded. "She mentioned something about going to the village of Kigoma. It's not far from here, just a day's journey by boat. You should be able to find her there." Brian thanked the woman and made his way to the lakeside, where boats bobbed gently in the water. He found a fisherman willing to take him to Kigoma and set off once again, the gentle rocking of the boat soothing his nerves. As they sailed across the clear blue waters of Lake Tanganyika, Brian thought about the last time he had seen Laura. They had been so happy, so full of dreams for the future. What had driven them apart, and why had she given the pendant to Zuri? The questions swirled in his mind, but he knew he was getting closer to the answers. Kigoma was a small, peaceful village nestled between the lake and the rolling hills. It was quieter than Ujiji, with a sense of calm that immediately put Brian at ease. He stepped off the boat and began asking the villagers if they knew Laura. It didn't take long for him to find someone who did. "She lives in the small house by the big baobab tree," a kind old man told him, pointing towards the edge of the village. "She's been here for a while now. A good woman, always helping others." Brian followed the old man's directions, his heart pounding with anticipation. The path led him to a cozy little house, shaded by a majestic baobab tree, its branches stretching out like welcoming arms. He approached the door, hesitating for a moment before knocking. The sound seemed to echo in the quiet of the late afternoon. Moments later, the door creaked open, and there she was. Laura stood before him, her eyes wide with surprise. She looked just as he remembered, with the same warm smile and gentle eyes. But there was something different too, a strength and serenity that seemed to come from within. "Brian?" she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Is it really you?" Brian nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Yes, Laura. It's me. I've been looking for you." Laura stepped forward, her eyes filling with tears. "I never thought I'd see you again," she said, reaching out to touch his hand. They stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of each other, years of separation melting away in an instant. "I found the pendant," Brian said finally, his voice soft, "around a young girl's neck. It led me to you." Laura's eyes widened in understanding. "Zuri," she said softly. "She's my daughter." Brian's mind reeled. "Your daughter?" he repeated, struggling to process the information. "But how? Why didn't you tell me?" Laura took a deep breath, leading Brian to a small bench under the baobab tree. "It's a long story," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. "But I'll tell you everything." They sat down together, the shade of the baobab tree providing a cocoon of privacy. "I tried to reach you," but the lines were down. And then, when I finally got through, I heard you were injured. I was scared, Brian. Scared that I would lose you and have to raise our child alone." Brian listened intently, his heart aching at the pain in Laura's voice. He remembered that fire, the intense heat, the overwhelming smoke, the moment he thought he wouldn't make it out. It had been one of the darkest times of his life. "I decided to go to my sister Nia's house to give birth," Laura continued. "But things got complicated. Zuri was born premature, and I was so weak. I needed time to recover, and by the time I was strong enough, you were already gone, back to Mwanga. I didn't know how to reach you." Tears welled up in Brian's eyes. "I thought you had left me," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't understand why you disappeared." Laura shook her head, her own eyes glistening with tears. "I would never leave you, Brian. I loved you too much. But I was so lost, so scared. I didn't know what to do. I gave the pendant to Zuri because it was the only piece of you I had left. I wanted her to feel connected to you, even if we were apart." Brian reached out, taking Laura's hand in his. "I'm here now," he said, his voice filled with determination. "And I want to make things right. I want to be a part of your life, and Zuri's life." Laura looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Are you sure, Brian? It won't be easy. We've been apart for so long. Things have changed." Brian nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm sure," he said firmly. "I've never stopped loving you, Laura. And now that I've found you, I don't want to let you go again." They sat there under the baobab tree, the weight of the past slowly lifting as they talked and shared their stories. The sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the village, and for the first time in years, Brian felt a sense of peace and hope. There were still many challenges ahead, many questions to answer. But for now, they were together, and that was enough. The journey had brought them back to each other, and Brian knew that with Laura by his side, they could face whatever the future held. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Brian and Laura continued to share their stories under the ancient baobab tree. The cool evening breeze rustled through the leaves, wrapping them in a soothing embrace. They talked about the years they had missed, the dreams they had once shared, and the new ones they hoped to build together. After a while, Laura led Brian into her cozy home. The walls were adorned with colorful fabrics and handmade crafts, each telling a story of resilience and hope. It was a warm and inviting space, much like the woman who had created it. "I'd like you to meet Zuri," Laura said softly, leading Brian to a small bedroom at the back of the house. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, Brian saw the little girl he had saved from the fire, now peacefully asleep. Brian's heart swelled with emotion as he looked at his daughter for the first time, truly seeing her. She was a reflection of both him and Laura, with her curly hair and bright, inquisitive eyes. He felt an overwhelming sense of love and protectiveness wash over him. "She's beautiful," Brian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud to be her father." Laura smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "She's been asking about you, even though she didn't know it. Every time she looks at the pendant, she asks about the man who gave it to me. Now she'll finally get to know you." Brian felt a surge of determination. "I want to be the best father I can be," he said, looking into Laura's eyes. "I want to make up for lost time and be there for both of you." They spent the rest of the evening planning their future, talking about how they would navigate the challenges ahead and create a new life together. Brian knew it wouldn't be easy, but with Laura and Zuri by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came their way. The next morning, Brian woke to the sound of birds singing and the smell of fresh bread baking. He found Laura and Zuri in the kitchen, laughing together as they prepared breakfast. "Good morning," Brian said, stepping into the room with a smile. Zuri looked up, her eyes wide with surprise and curiosity. "Good morning," she replied shyly, glancing at her mother for reassurance. Laura smiled warmly. "Zuri, this is Brian. He's a very special person to both of us." Zuri's eyes sparkled with excitement. "You're the one who saved me from the fire." Brian nodded, kneeling down to be at eye level with her. "Yes, I am. And I'm so glad I did. It's wonderful to finally meet you, Zuri." Zuri hesitated for a moment, then threw her arms around Brian in a hug. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. Brian hugged her back, feeling a sense of joy and completeness that he had never known before. "You're welcome, Zuri. I'm so happy to be here with you and your mother." As the days turned into weeks, Brian settled into life in Kigoma. He found work as a firefighter in the local community, where his skills and bravery were quickly recognized and appreciated. He and Laura rebuilt their relationship, taking each day as it came and finding strength in their love for each other. Together, they explored the beautiful landscape around Kigoma, from the rolling hills to the shimmering waters of Lake Tanganyika. They shared their hopes and dreams, and Brian discovered a deep sense of peace and belonging he had never felt before. One evening, as they sat by the lake watching the sun set, Brian turned to Laura, his eyes filled with determination. "I want us to be a family, Laura," he said, taking her hand in his. "I want to build a life with you and Zuri, to create new memories and face the future together." Laura looked at him, her eyes reflecting the same resolve. "I want that too, Brian," she replied, her voice steady and filled with love. "I've always wanted that." With their hands clasped together, they made a silent promise to each other, a promise of love, commitment, and a future filled with hope and possibility. Years passed, and their bond grew stronger with each passing day. Brian, Laura, and Zuri became a family in every sense of the word. They faced challenges together, celebrated victories, and cherished the simple moments that made life so precious. The pendant, once a symbol of separation and loss, now hung in their home as a reminder of the journey that had brought them together. It represented their resilience, their love, and the unbreakable bond they had forged through adversity. And so, under the shade of the ancient baobab tree, and by the shimmering waters of Lake Tanganyika, Brian and Laura found their way back to each other. Their story, once filled with uncertainty and longing, became a testament to the power of love and the strength of the human spirit. In the heart of Africa, where the past and present intertwined like the roots of the baobab tree, they discovered that true love could overcome any obstacle, and that together they could build a future filled with endless possibilities.